The acceptance letter from Stanford was supposed to be the happiest moment of my life. Instead, it was the day I discovered my parents had given away my entire college fund, over $120,000 that my grandparents had set aside for me, to my cousin, Melissa. "She deserves it more than you," my father said with cold finality. "I'm Tyler Mitchell, and this is how I went from a betrayed son to holding the mortgage on my parents' house in just 5 years. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just success. It's making sure those who wronged you have to face you every month when the mortgage payment comes due." I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The day everything changed started like any other spring morning during my senior year. April in Connecticut brought a perfect blue sky as I walked down our driveway to check the mail. I'd been obsessively checking every day for weeks, waiting for responses from the colleges I'd applied to. Stanford was my dream school. Their computer science program was among the best in the country, and I'd spent 4 years maintaining a 4.2 GPA, leading the robotics team to state championships, and developing my own app that had gained modest traction in the Google Play Store. I'd done everything right. The envelope was there, thick and promising. My hands trembled as I tore it open right there by the mailbox. "Dear Tyler Mitchell, we are pleased to inform you." I didn't even finish reading before I was running back to our colonial-style house, bursting through the front door. "Mom, Dad, I got in," I shouted, waving the letter. "Stanford, I actually got in." My parents were in the kitchen. Mom was at the island chopping vegetables for dinner, while Dad sat at the table with his laptop, probably checking stock portfolios as usual. Their reactions were strangely muted. Mom gave a small smile that didn't reach her eyes, and Dad barely looked up. "That's nice, Tyler," Mom said, putting down her knife. "We need to talk about that, actually." Something in her tone made my excitement falter. I lowered the acceptance letter, suddenly aware of the tension in the room. "What's going on?" I asked. Dad finally closed his laptop and gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit down, son." I sat, the acceptance letter still clutched in my hand, now feeling like it weighed 100 pounds. "We need to discuss finances," Dad said, his voice businesslike. "Stanford is very expensive, and we need to be practical here." "But that's not a problem, right?" I said, confusion creeping in. "Grandpa and Grandma Mitchell set up that college fund for me when I was born. You guys told me it had over $120,000 in it by now." My parents exchanged a look I couldn't quite interpret. Mom came over and sat at the table too, folding her hands in front of her. "Tyler," she began carefully, "there's been a change of plans with that money." "What do you mean, change of plans?" I asked, my throat suddenly dry. Dad cleared his throat. "We've decided that the money would be better used for your cousin Melissa's education." The words hit me like a physical blow. Melissa was my Uncle Robert's daughter, Dad's brother's kid. She was also a senior, also applying to colleges, but we'd never been particularly close. What?" I stammered. "You gave my college fund to Melissa? All of it?" "It's not technically your money, Tyler," Dad said, his tone hardening. "It was always at our discretion how those funds would be used." "But Grandpa and Grandma set it up for me," I protested, my voice rising. "They literally called it Tyler's College Fund." "They entrusted it to us to manage," Mom interjected. "And we've made the decision that Melissa needs it more than you do." "How could she possibly need it more than me?" I demanded, the acceptance letter now crumpled in my fist. "I worked my ass off for 4 years to get into Stanford. This was the plan all along." Dad's expression darkened. "Watch your language in this house. And frankly, Tyler, Melissa deserves it more. She's had a harder time than you, and she's planning to go into medicine. That's a more worthwhile pursuit than playing with computers all day." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Playing with computers? I'd been coding since I was 12, had won regional competitions, had even published my own app, and now my future was being dismissed as if it were nothing more than a hobby. Robert and Melissa don't have the resources we do, Mom added, as if that explained everything. They've had a rough go since the divorce, and medical school is expensive. So what am I supposed to do? I asked, my voice hollow. Stanford costs over $70,000 a year with tuition, room, and board. There are perfectly good state schools, Dad replied with a wave of his hand. Connecticut State has a decent computer program, and you can live at home to save money, or take out loans like most students do. The casual way he dismissed my dreams made something shift inside me. It wasn't just the money. It was the realization that my parents had never truly valued my goals, my work, or my future. When did you decide this? I asked quietly. Another uncomfortable glance between them. We finalized it last month, Mom admitted. We transferred the funds to an account in Melissa's name. Last month? I echoed. So all this time I've been waiting for acceptance letters, thinking I had options. You already knew I wouldn't be able to attend anywhere but a state school? Don't be so dramatic, Tyler, Dad said dismissively. Plenty of successful people go to state schools. You're acting like we've ruined your life. You gave away $120,000 that was meant for my education, without even talking to me about it. I shot back, unable to keep the hurt and anger from my voice. How is that not something worth being upset about? It wasn't your decision to make, Dad said firmly. The money was in our names, and we made the choice we felt was best. I stared at them, these people I'd trusted implicitly my entire life, and suddenly felt like I was looking at strangers. Did you even talk to Grandpa and Grandma about this? Do they know? Mom looked down at her hands. They're getting older, Tyler. They don't need to be bothered with financial decisions anymore. That told me everything I needed to know. My grandparents would never have approved of this. They'd set that money aside specifically for me, had told me on multiple occasions how proud they were of my accomplishments and how excited they were for me to use that money for college. So you went behind their backs, I said flatly. And behind mine. That's enough, Dad said, his tone warning me not to push further. The decision has been made. You need to accept it and adjust your plans accordingly. I sat there, the acceptance letter, my dream, crumpled in my hand, and felt something hard inside me. Not just anger, but resolve. Can I at least call Grandpa and Grandma? I asked, keeping my voice carefully neutral. I don't think that's a good idea right now, Dad said quickly. They're on that Mediterranean cruise, remember? Let's not disturb them with this. Of course, the 2-week cruise they'd been saving up for. Convenient timing. Fine, I said, standing up. I need some air. I walked out of the kitchen, past the living room with all its family photos displaying what I'd always thought was a happy, supportive family, and out onto the front porch. Once outside, I smoothed out the acceptance letter and read it fully, for the first time. We are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted to Stanford University's class of 2023. Additionally, based on your outstanding academic achievements and demonstrated financial need, we are offering you our presidential scholarship covering 25% of your tuition costs. Even with the scholarship, Stanford would still cost over $50,000 a year. Without my college fund, it was impossible. My parents made too much money for me to qualify for substantial financial aid, but apparently not enough that they were willing to help me themselves. I sat on the porch steps, letting the reality sink in. My cousin Melissa, who had decent but not exceptional grades, who had never seemed particularly passionate about medicine until recently, was getting my future, and my parents, the people who were supposed to have my back, had made that decision without even giving me a chance to fight for myself. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from my best friend, Derek. Any news yet? Stanford is still keeping you hanging? I stared at the message, unsure how to even begin explaining what had just happened. Then, instead of texting back, I called him. Dude, what's up? Derek answered. I got into Stanford, I said, my voice flat. Holy shit, that's awesome, he exclaimed. Wait, why don't you sound excited? Did something happen? My parents gave my entire college fund to my cousin Melissa, I said, the words still feeling surreal as I spoke them. All of it, over $120,000 that my grandparents set aside for me. What? Are you serious? Derek sounded as shocked as I felt. They can't do that, can they? Apparently they can. The account was in their names, even though my grandparents intended it for me. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. But why would they do that? That makes no sense. I let out a bitter laugh. According to them, Melissa deserves it more because she wants to be a doctor, and that's more worthwhile than my playing with computers. That's bullshit, Derek said emphatically. Your app alone shows more initiative than anything Melissa has ever done. No offense to her. None taken, I said. I don't know what to do now. Stanford was the dream, but there's no way I can afford it without that money. What about your grandparents? Couldn't you talk to them? They're on a cruise right now, conveniently enough. My parents don't want me bothering them with this. I bet they don't, Derek muttered. This is seriously messed up, Ty. What are you going to do? I looked back at the house where my parents were probably congratulating themselves on their decision, never once considering the devastation they'd caused. I don't know yet, I said slowly. But I'm not just going to accept this. Somehow, some way, I'm going to find a path to Stanford, and I'm never going to forget what they did. That's the spirit, Derek encouraged. And hey, I'm here for whatever you need. My parents like you better than me anyway. You can probably move in if you need to. That managed to pull a small smile from me. Thanks, man. I might take you up on that. After hanging up, I sat there a while longer, trying to process everything. The acceptance letter in my hand represented years of hard work and ambition. I wasn't willing to let that go without a fight. My phone buzzed again, this time with a notification from my banking app. Every month, my part-time job at the local electronics store deposited my paycheck directly into my account. It wasn't much, about $600 a month during school months and more in summer, but I'd been saving consistently since sophomore year. The notification reminded me that I had resources of my own. Not enough for Stanford, certainly, but enough to start thinking about options. I opened my laptop and navigated to the Stanford financial aid page, then started researching every possible scholarship and loan option. If my parents thought I would just quietly accept their decision and give up on my dreams, they were about to learn how wrong they were. As evening approached, I received another text. This one from Melissa herself. Hey, Tyler. Just wanted to check if you heard back from any schools yet? I got into Johns Hopkins. So excited. Johns Hopkins, one of the top medical schools in the country, with tuition comparable to Stanford's. And now she would be attending with my money, the money that had been meant for me. I stared at the text, a mix of emotions swirling through me. It wasn't Melissa's fault. Not really. She probably had no idea where the money had come from. It was my parents' betrayal that cut deep. I didn't respond to her text. Instead, I made a decision. I went back into the house, straight to my room, and closed the door. My parents didn't try to stop me or continue the conversation, which only confirmed their minds were made up. On my desk was the financial aid information packet from Connecticut State that had arrived a week earlier. I'd tossed it aside, confident I wouldn't need it. Now I picked it up and began reading through it carefully. If I was going to be forced to attend a state school, I would need to maximize every scholarship opportunity. But as I reviewed the materials, a new idea began to take shape. I opened my laptop again and started researching deferment policies at Stanford. What if I didn't have to give up on Stanford entirely? What if I could defer for a year, work full-time to save money, and use that time to find alternative funding sources? By midnight, I had the beginnings of a plan. It wasn't ideal, and it would require sacrifices, but it gave me something to focus on beyond the anger and betrayal. I would need to be strategic, resourceful, and determined. I would need to outthink my parents at their own game. As I finally lay down to sleep, exhausted from the emotional roller coaster of the day, one thought kept circling in my mind. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. My parents had made their choice, and now I would make mine. They might control my college fund, but they didn't control my future. And someday, somehow, they would regret choosing Melissa over me. Sleep eluded me that night. I tossed and turned, my mind racing with questions, plans, and a growing sense that there was more to this situation than my parents had revealed. By 6 a.m., I'd given up on rest and sat at my desk, opening a fresh document on my laptop. If I was going to understand what had really happened to my college fund, I needed to start gathering information systematically. The house was still quiet as I crept downstairs to my father's home office. Dad was meticulous about his records, a trait I'd inherited, and I knew he kept important financial documents in his filing cabinet. The bottom drawer was locked, but I'd discovered the key's hiding place years ago when looking for extra batteries. It was taped under his desk drawer, exactly where it had always been. With shaking hands, I unlocked the drawer and began carefully sifting through the folders. Estate planning, investments, taxes. Then I found it. Mitchell Family Education. Trust. I pulled out the folder and began photographing every document inside with my phone. Bank statements, transfer authorizations, trust documents. I captured them all, making sure to return each paper exactly as I'd found it. The trust documents confirmed what I'd always known. My grandparents had indeed established this fund specifically for my education. Their names, William and Eleanor Mitchell, were right there on the paperwork, along with my name as the beneficiary. But as my parents had pointed out, they were listed as trustees with full discretionary control over disbursements. What caught my eye, however, was the date of the most recent transfer. March 15th, just 3 weeks ago. The entirety of the fund, 127,840 to be exact, had been transferred to an account at First National Bank. My parents hadn't just recently decided to give my money to Melissa. They'd already done it, while I was still waiting to hear back from colleges. I returned everything to its place, locked the drawer, and replaced the key. Back in my room, I began reviewing the photos I'd taken. Something wasn't adding up. Why? The sudden decision to transfer the money? My parents had always talked about this fund as mine. What had changed? Later that morning, I came downstairs for breakfast, determined to maintain a neutral facade while I investigated further. Mom was making pancakes, my favorite, clearly an attempt at reconciliation. "Good morning, honey," she said too brightly. "I thought you might want your favorite breakfast today." "Thanks," I said, taking a plate and sitting at the island counter. "Where's Dad?" "He had an early meeting at the office," she replied, not quite meeting my eyes. "He'll be home for dinner." Perfect. I needed time alone with Mom anyway. She was always the more forthcoming of my parents. "I've been thinking about what you guys told me yesterday." I began carefully, keeping my tone even. "About Melissa needing the money more than me." Mom's shoulders tensed slightly. "I know it's disappointing, Tyler, but you're so smart and resourceful. You'll find a way to make things work." "I'm trying to understand," I continued, cutting into my pancakes. "This seems like such a sudden decision. Has Uncle Robert been having financial problems?" Mom hesitated, flipping another pancake with perhaps more force than necessary. "Robert's business has been struggling since the recession, and after the divorce, He's been paying alimony to Angela. It's been hard for them. But Uncle Robert makes good money, doesn't he? His construction company used to do really well. I kept my tone conversational, just a curious son trying to understand family dynamics. Things change, Tyler. The economy. Unexpected expenses. She trailed off, then added, family helps family when they're in need. I'm family too, I pointed out quietly. Mom turned to face me, her expression a mix of guilt and resolution. You have opportunities Melissa doesn't. Your grades, your technical skills, you can get scholarships. Melissa needs this chance. I nodded slowly, as if considering this perspective for the first time. When did Uncle Robert ask for the money? Mom's eyes widened slightly. He didn't ask exactly. Your father and I offered when we heard about Melissa's acceptance to Johns Hopkins? Interesting. So the timeline matched up with Melissa's acceptance, not with any sudden financial crisis. I filed that information away. Melissa must have been really grateful, I said, watching Mom's reaction closely. Of course, Mom said quickly. She was very appreciative. Did she know it was my college fund? Mom's hesitation told me everything I needed to know before she even spoke. We didn't present it that way, just that we wanted to help with her education. So Melissa didn't know. That aligned with her text message to me. There had been no acknowledgement of taking my money, no thank you, nothing to suggest she understood the source of her sudden financial windfall. I see, I said, finishing my pancakes. Well, I should get ready for school. Tyler, Mom called as I stood to leave. I hope someday you'll understand that this was a difficult decision for us, too. We only want what's best for our family. I nodded noncommittally and headed upstairs, my mind processing this new information. Mom's explanation about Uncle Robert's financial struggles seemed plausible on the surface, but something still felt off. If they were truly motivated by family financial need, why not discuss it with me first? Why the secrecy? At school, I went. Through my classes on autopilot, my thoughts elsewhere. During lunch, I found Derek in the cafeteria and pulled him into an empty classroom. I need your help, I told him, explaining what I'd discovered that morning. Derek whistled low. So they just transferred all the money without even telling you they were considering it? That's cold, man. Something doesn't add up, I said. Mom claims they did it because Uncle Robert is struggling financially, but I'm not convinced that's the whole story. What about your cousin Melissa? Have you talked to her? I shook my head. Not yet. I don't want to put her in an awkward position. If she doesn't know where the money came from. Good point, Derek agreed. So what's your next move? I need to talk to my grandparents as soon as they get back from their cruise, and I want to learn more about Uncle Robert's financial situation. Derek's father worked at the same club as my uncle. My dad might know something, he offered. Robert's always bragging about business deals at the club. Could you ask him? Casually, though. I don't want this go back to my parents yet. Consider it done, Derek promised. What else? I hesitated, then decided to trust my best friend completely. I'm thinking about contacting Stanford to see if I can defer for a year. Work full-time, save up, apply for every scholarship I can find. You really don't want to give up on Stanford, huh? It's not just about Stanford anymore, I admitted. It's about not letting them decide my future for me. After school, I had a shift at Hartford Electronics, the store where I'd been working. Part-time since sophomore year. My boss, Marcus, had become something of a mentor to me over the years. He'd even helped me develop my first app. The store was quiet that afternoon, giving me a chance to talk to Marcus about my situation. He listened without interrupting, his face growing increasingly troubled. That's a tough break, Tyler, he said when I finished. Really tough. Have you considered legal options? That money was intended for you. I've looked into it, I replied. The problem is, legally, the trustees, my parents, have discretionary control. They can technically use it for any educational purpose, not just mine. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. What about hours here? I know you've been part-time because of school, but I could use you full-time over the summer. It's not Stanford money, but it would help. I'd appreciate that, I said sincerely. Every bit helps at this point. As I was restocking shelves later that afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Derek. Dad says your uncle's company just landed a major contract with the city. New development project worth millions. Doesn't sound like someone struggling financially to me. A new piece of the puzzle, and one that contradicted my mother's explanation. If Uncle Robert had just secured a major contract, why would my parents need to raid my college fund to help Melissa? That evening at dinner, I carefully observed my parents. Dad seemed unusually interested in my college plans, asking pointed questions about Connecticut State's computer science program. It's ranked in the top 50 nationally, he said encouragingly, and they have good industry connections for internships. I'm still exploring my options, I replied neutrally. I might take a gap year, actually. Dad frowned. A gap year? That's not like you, Tyler. You've always been so focused. I'm still focused, I assured him. But circumstances have changed. I need to reevaluate my path. Mom looked distressed. A gap year could derail your education. Statistics show many students who take time off never go back. I'm not most students, I reminded her. And I've never been given the chance to prove I can handle setbacks until now, have I? An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. I decided to test my new information. I heard Uncle Robert's company landed a big city contract, I said casually. That must be exciting for him. My parents exchanged a quick glance. Where did you hear that? Dad asked. I shrugged. Around. Is it true? Robert has had his ups and downs in business, Dad said evasively. One contract doesn't solve years of financial mismanagement. Interesting how quickly the story shifted from struggling since the recession to financial mismanagement. I pressed further. So the money for Melissa? That was to help Uncle Robert specifically? Not just because you think she deserves it more than me? Mom put down her fork. Tyler, we've explained our decision. Melissa's educational path requires more financial support than yours. Her medical school ambitions. Medical school is years away, I interrupted. Johns Hopkins is just an undergrad for her, same as Stanford would be for me. The foundation matters, Dad said firmly. And this conversation is over. We're not going to justify our decisions to you repeatedly. I nodded and returned to my dinner, but internally I was more convinced than ever that I wasn't getting the full story. Later that night, I received an unexpected call from my grandmother. My heart raced as I answered. Grandma? I thought you were on your cruise. We are, sweetheart, her familiar voice replied, slightly distorted by the ship's satellite connection. But we're at port in Barcelona today, and I wanted to check in. Your graduation is coming up soon. I hesitated. Should I tell her what had happened? I decided to test the waters first. Yeah, about that. I got accepted to Stanford, Grandma. Stanford. Oh, William, did you hear that? I could hear my grandfather's voice in the background. Tyler got into Stanford. That's wonderful, sweetheart. We're so proud of you. Thanks, Grandma. I'm really excited about it. As you should be. That college fund we set up will certainly come in handy now. Stanford isn't cheap. My stomach dropped. They didn't know. About that, I began carefully. Have Mom and Dad talked to you recently about the college fund? A pause. Not specifically, no. Is everything all right, Tyler? You sound strange. I took a deep breath. Grandma, Mom and Dad transferred all the money from my college fund to help Melissa go to Johns Hopkins. They said they decided she deserved it more than me. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for so long I thought we'd been disconnected. Then I heard my grandmother's voice, suddenly tight with anger. They did what? William, Come here right now. Tyler, tell us exactly what happened. I explained everything, the conversation with my parents, their justifications, and what I'd discovered about Uncle Robert's supposedly precarious finances. This is absolutely unacceptable, Grandma said when I finished. That money was for you, Tyler. We were explicit about that when we set up the trust. They said they had discretionary control, I explained. Discretionary control for your education. Grandpa's voice came through, equally angry. Not to redirect it to someone else entirely. We're cutting our cruise short. We'll be home in 3 days. No, don't do that, I protested. You've been planning this trip for years. This is more important, Grandma insisted. Family does right by family, and this isn't right. Don't worry, Tyler. We'll sort this out when we get home. After hanging up, I felt a mix of relief and anxiety. My grandparents were on my side, but I'd just set off what would likely be a major family conflict. Still, it confirmed my suspicions. My parents had acted without my grandparents' knowledge or approval. The next morning, Saturday, I decided to take a more direct approach. Uncle Robert usually spent Saturday mornings at the Woodland Hills Country Club, playing golf with his business associates. I drove there, knowing I could get in as his nephew. Sure enough, I found him at the clubhouse bar after his round, celebrating with 3 other men in polo shirts. "Tyler," he exclaimed, surprised to see me. "What brings you here?" "Just wanted to congratulate you on Melissa getting into Johns Hopkins," I said, keeping my tone friendly. "That's a great achievement." Uncle Robert beamed with pride. "Thanks. We're thrilled. She worked hard for it. I heard Mom and Dad helped out with the tuition," I continued, watching his reaction closely. A flicker of something, discomfort, crossed his face before his smile returned. "They've been very generous. Family helping family. You know how it is." "I do," I agreed. "Actually, I just got accepted to Stanford myself." "Stanford? That's fantastic," Robert said, clapping me on the shoulder. "You must be excited." "I am, though I'm worried about the cost. My college fund isn't available anymore." Robert's smile faltered. "Ah, well, I'm sure your parents have a plan. They've always been so supportive of your education." He seemed genuinely surprised by my implied financial concern. Either he was an excellent actor, or he truly didn't know the money for Melissa had come from my college fund specifically. "I'm sure it'll work out," I said vaguely. "By the way, congratulations on the city contract. That must be a game changer for your company." Robert's face lit up. "Thanks. It's been years in the making. Finally going to put Mitchell Construction on the map in a big way." No mention of financial struggles. No indication that his business was anything but thriving. Another piece that contradicted my parents' explanation. I left the country club with more questions than answers. If Uncle Robert wasn't in financial trouble, and he didn't specifically ask for help with Melissa's tuition, why had my parents decided to give away my college fund? Back at home, I found an email from Stanford's financial aid office responding to my inquiry. They outlined various scholarship opportunities I might still apply for, though many deadlines had already passed. They also confirmed that I could defer my admission for 1 year while maintaining my presidential scholarship, provided I submitted a formal request explaining my circumstances. It wasn't ideal, but it gave me something concrete to work with. I could defer, work full-time, apply for every remaining scholarship, and potentially take out loans for the difference. Stanford was still possible. Difficult, but possible. As I was drafting my deferment request, my phone rang. It was Melissa. "Tyler? Hi. I hope it's okay that I'm calling. You never responded to my text about Johns Hopkins." I hesitated, unsure how to navigate this conversation. "Sorry about that. Congratulations on your acceptance." "Thanks. I heard you got into Stanford. That's amazing." She sounded genuinely happy for me. "Yeah, it is," I said, "though I'm not sure I'll be able to go. Tuition is pretty steep. Oh, she said, sounding surprised. I thought, well, never. Mind? I'm sure you'll figure it out. You're the smart one in the family. What did you think? I pressed gently. It's nothing. Just, Uncle Mark and Aunt Susan have always talked about how they were saving for your education. I guess I assumed you had a college fund or something, so she didn't know. That confirmed it. Melissa, I said carefully, did my parents offer to help with your Johns Hopkins tuition? Yes, she said, sounding suddenly uncertain. They approached. Dad about it a few weeks ago, right after I got my acceptance letter. Said they wanted to help with my education. It was really generous of them. How much did they offer? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Around $120,000, she replied. It's practically my entire undergrad tuition. I was shocked, honestly. I didn't even know they had that kind of money to spare. They didn't. They had my money to spare. Did they tell you where that money was coming from? I asked. No. Is something wrong, Tyler? You sound strange. I made a split-second decision. That was my college fund, Melissa. The money my grandparents set aside for my education. My parents gave it to you without telling me or my grandparents. The silence on the other end was deafening. What? She finally whispered. Tyler, I had no idea. I swear. I would never have accepted if I'd known. I believe you, I said, and I did. Melissa and I had never been close, but she wasn't cruel or conniving. It's not your fault. My parents made this decision. But why? Why would they do that? They said you deserve it more than me, I replied, the words still bitter on my tongue. That medicine is more worthwhile than computer science. That's ridiculous, Melissa said, her voice growing angry. Your work with coding is brilliant. Everyone knows that. And it's not their decision to make about whose education matters more. Her immediate defense of me was unexpected and touching. Perhaps we were more allies than I'd realized. I'm so sorry, Tyler, she continued. I'll talk to my dad. We'll figure this out. No, I said quickly. Please don't say anything yet. My grandparents are coming home early from their cruise to deal with this. I'd rather wait and see how that plays out first. Are you sure? This isn't right. I'm sure. For now, just pretend you don't know anything. I'll keep you in the loop, I promise. After hanging up, I stared at my wall of academic achievements. Honor, role certificates, robotics competition trophies, my app development award, all symbols of a path I'd committed to years ago, a path my parents had seemingly supported until suddenly deciding it wasn't worthwhile enough. The pieces weren't quite fitting together yet, but I was gathering evidence, building a clearer picture of what had really happened. My grandparents were coming home. Melissa now knew the truth. And I had confirmation that Uncle Robert's financial situation wasn't nearly as dire as my parents had claimed. Something else was going on. And I was determined to find out what. Sunday morning brought the familiar sounds of my mother preparing breakfast, the gentle clink of dishes, the sizzle of bacon on the stovetop, the coffee machine's steady gurgle. Normal weekend sounds in. A household that now felt anything but normal to me. I checked my phone. 2 missed calls from Melissa, a text from Derek asking for updates, and an email from my grandparents with their updated travel itinerary. They'd be home Tuesday evening, just 3 more days of pretending everything was fine. 3 days of strategic silence and careful observation. I took a deep breath, ran a hand through my hair, and headed downstairs. Time to put on the performance of my life. Morning, I said, entering the kitchen with a carefully neutral expression. Good morning, honey, Mom replied, flipping pancakes at the stove. Sleep well? Well enough, I said with a shrug, pouring myself a cup of coffee. Lots on my mind. Dad lowered his newspaper, eyeing me over his reading glasses. You look tired. Were you up late on that computer again? I nodded, letting him believe what he wanted. Better than admitting I'd spent hours documenting everything I'd learned about my missing college fund, organizing evidence, and researching my options. I was looking into scholarship opportunities. For Connecticut State, I lied smoothly. There are actually some decent ones for computer science majors. The tension in my father's shoulders visibly relaxed. That's the spirit, Tyler. I knew you'd come around to seeing this realistically. I forced a small smile, hiding the cold calculation behind it. Well, you've made it clear I don't have many other options. Mom placed a stack of pancakes in front of me, her expression a mixture of guilt and relief. You've always been so practical. Tyler, that's one of your strengths. If only they knew how practical I was being right now. Any plans today? Dad asked, returning to his paper. Homework, then a shift at Hartford Electronics from 2 to 6, I replied. A normal Sunday for a normal teenager, nothing to see here. Will you be home for dinner? Mom asked. I nodded, cutting into my pancakes. Should be. Marcus said it wouldn't be a long shift. Good, she said with forced cheerfulness. I'm making your favorite pot roast, another peace offering. My parents were trying so hard to normalize what they'd done, to ease their guilt with pancakes and pot roast, as if comfort food could compensate for stealing my future. Sounds great, I said, matching her tone. Hey, did Grandma and Grandpa call you guys from their cruise? They mentioned they might check in. I watched them carefully. Mom's hand stilled momentarily as she wiped down the counter. Dad's newspaper lowered just a fraction. Not recently, Dad said after a beat too long. Why do you ask? I shrugged. Just curious. Thought they might want to hear about Stanford. I'm sure they'll call when they can, Mom interjected quickly. International calling from cruise ships is expensive. Right, I agreed, noting their discomfort. They hadn't heard from my grandparents either, which meant my conversation with them hadn't yet been revealed. Good. Breakfast continued with mundane conversation, neighborhood gossip, Dad's upcoming business trip, the unseasonably warm weather. I participated just enough to appear engaged while my mind worked on a different level, cataloging their behaviors, noting the slight strain in their voices when Stanford was mentioned, observing how they'd both relax whenever I referenced Connecticut State. They so desperately wanted to believe I had surrendered to their decision. After breakfast, I retreated to my room, ostensibly to study. Instead, I called Derek. Any more intel from your dad about Uncle Robert? I asked without a preamble. Nothing specific, Derek replied. But he mentioned your uncle was buying a new boat, something about celebrating his company's success. A new boat, while my college fund vanished into Melissa's tuition payments. That's helpful, actually, I said. Confirms what I already suspected about his finances. What's your next move? Derek asked. Grandparents get back Tuesday. Until then, I'm playing along, making my parents think I've accepted their decision. And after Tuesday? I hesitated. That depends on what my grandparents can do. Legally, it might be complicated to recover the money, but at minimum, I want the truth about why my parents really did this. You think there's more to it than what they said? Definitely. The explanation about Uncle Robert's finances doesn't hold water. And there's something off about the timing. After finishing my call with Derek, I spent an hour actually studying. Calculus problems weren't going to solve themselves, and despite everything, I wasn't about to let my GPA slip during my final semester. Then I drafted my deferment request to Stanford, carefully explaining my unexpected financial circumstances without placing blame or sounding like I was making excuses. At 1:30, I headed to work, grateful for the reprieve from the suffocating atmosphere at home. Hartford Electronics had been my sanctuary since sophomore year, a place where I was valued for my knowledge and work ethic, where customers sought my expertise on everything from gaming systems to computer builds. There he is, Stanford man, Marcus greeted me as I entered the store. How's it going, Tyler? I shook my head slightly, and Marcus, perceptive as always, immediately understood. He nodded and switched topics seamlessly. Got a custom PC built. In the back, that's giving me trouble. Think you could take a look when you get a chance? Sure thing, I replied, grateful for his discretion. The afternoon passed quickly with a steady stream of customers and technical problems to solve. I was explaining the differences between graphics cards to a customer when I looked up and saw Uncle Robert entering the store, Melissa trailing reluctantly behind him. My heart rate spiked, but I maintained my composure, finishing with the customer, before approaching them. Uncle Robert, Melissa, I greeted them casually. What brings you to Hartford Electronics? Uncle Robert clapped me on the shoulder. Melissa mentioned you work here. Thought we'd stop by, maybe look at laptops for her college setup. I glanced at Melissa, who looked intensely uncomfortable, avoiding my eyes. She'd clearly been dragged, here against her will. Sure, I said, guiding them to our laptop display. We have several models that would be good for pre-med students. As I walked them through various options, I kept my demeanor entirely professional. If Uncle Robert had come hoping to detect resentment or bitterness, he would be disappointed. Melissa. Mentioned you got into Stanford, Robert said as I demonstrated a high-end Dell. Quite an achievement. Thanks, I replied with a practiced smile. I'm still working out the financial details. Uncle Robert shifted uncomfortably. Yes, well, college is expensive these days. Your parents mentioned you're considering Connecticut State? So they'd been discussing me. Interesting. It's one option, I said noncommittally. I'm exploring several paths. Melissa finally spoke up. Tyler's app development skills could probably get him a job at a tech company even without college, Dad. He's already published a successful app. I shot her a grateful look. That's kind of you to say, Melissa, but I'm still planning on getting my degree. Just need to figure out the right timing and place. Uncle Robert nodded. A flicker of what? Might have been guilt crossing his face. Well, I'm sure it will all work out. Your parents have always had your best interests at heart. Have they? I asked, my tone light but my gaze direct. A tense silence followed before Uncle Robert cleared his throat and gestured to one of the laptops. This one looks promising. What do you think, Melissa? We completed the transaction without further personal discussion. As they were leaving, Melissa hung back for a moment. I tried calling you, she whispered. I know. I'll call you tonight, I promised quietly. Not here. She nodded and hurried after her father. Marcus appeared at my side as they left. Family drama? You have no idea, I sighed. Was that your uncle? The one whose daughter got your college? Money? I nodded. Seemed pretty comfortable buying a top-of-the-line laptop, Marcus observed. Not exactly the behavior of someone in financial distress. Exactly, I agreed. Nothing about their story adds up. When my shift ended, I returned home to find both my parents making an unusual effort to create a pleasant family dinner. The dining room table was set with the good china, candles were lit, and Dad had opened a bottle of wine, all for a Sunday dinner that would normally be eaten in front of the TV. What's the occasion? I asked, hanging my jacket by the door. No occasion, Mom said brightly. Just thought we could use a nice family dinner. The guilt was practically radiating off them. I wondered if Uncle Robert had called after his visit to the store, perhaps expressing concern about my demeanor or Melissa's obvious discomfort. Throughout dinner, my parents maintained a stream of upbeat conversation, carefully avoiding any mention of college or finances. Dad talked about a colleague's retirement party. Mom discussed plans for summer planting in her garden. I participated just enough to appear engaged, providing anecdotes from work and school while observing their behavior. They were trying so hard to create an illusion of normalcy, to convince themselves that our family was still intact despite what they'd done. I played along, laughing at Dad's jokes, commenting on Mom's garden plans, even helping clear the dishes, with apparent good humor. We should do something special for your graduation, Mom suggested as we finished dessert. Maybe a weekend trip to Boston? You've always loved the Science Museum there. A trip to Boston, as if that could compensate for $127,842. 16s. That sounds nice, I said with a measured smile. Though I might need to work that weekend if I'm saving for college. A flicker of discomfort crossed both their faces. You don't need to worry about that right now, Dad said quickly. We'll make sure you have what you need for Connecticut State. I nodded, letting the subject drop. No need to remind them that what I needed was the college fund they'd given away. After dinner, I retreated to my room, claiming homework as an excuse. Once alone, I called Melissa. I'm so sorry about today, she said immediately. Dad just showed up and insisted I go with him to look at laptops. He was acting weird the whole time. Did he say why he wanted to see me? I asked. Not directly, but he kept asking questions on the drive over. Whether you seemed upset at school, if I thought you were handling the disappointment of not going to Stanford well. What did you tell him? That I hadn't seen much of you at school lately, she replied. I didn't let on that I knew about the money. But Tyler, this is eating me up inside. I can't accept this money knowing where it came from. Let's wait until my grandparents get back, I advised. They might have a solution that doesn't put you in the middle of this. But what about your Stanford plans? I'm working on it, I assured her. I've requested a deferment for a year. That gives me time to figure out funding options. I could decline Johns Hopkins, she offered hesitantly. Go to a state school instead. Then your parents could give the money back. The offer touched me deeply. Melissa was willing to give up her dream school for me, even though we'd never been particularly close. I appreciate that, Melissa, but that's not the solution, I said. This isn't about you versus me. It's about my parents making a unilateral decision without consulting me or my grandparents. It's about them deciding whose dreams matter more. It's wrong, she said firmly, and I don't want to be part of it. Just hold tight for now, I urged. Act normal around your dad and my parents. Let's see what happens when my grandparents get back. After hanging up, I worked on actual homework for a while, then spent some time researching private student loans. The options weren't great, high interest rates, complicated terms, but combined with my savings and potential scholarships, they might make Stanford possible. Around midnight, I heard my parents' bedroom door open and hushed voices in the hallway. Curious, I crept to my door and listened. Should tell him the truth, Mom was saying, her voice barely audible. And risk everything? Dad responded, tension evident even in his whisper. No, he's accepting Connecticut State. Let it be, Susan. But what if William and Eleanor find out? They'll never forgive us. They're halfway around the world. By the time they're back, everything will be settled. Tyler will be enrolled at Connecticut State, Melissa at Johns Hopkins, and the money will be where it needs to be. I still think we should have found another way, Mom insisted. There was no other way, Dad replied firmly. Robert would have lost everything. You know that. Their voices faded as they returned to their bedroom, leaving me with more questions than answers. What did Uncle Robert potentially losing everything have to do with my college fund? And why were they so concerned about my grandparents finding out? I returned to my desk and opened a new document, typing up this latest piece of intelligence. The picture was becoming clearer, but crucial elements were still missing. What connection existed between my college fund and Uncle Robert's business that my parents were so desperate to hide? Monday morning arrived with a text from my grandparents. Changed flights. Arriving tonight at 8 p.m. Don't tell your parents. Meet us at the Riverside Hotel. They were coming home even earlier than planned. I texted back a quick confirmation, then prepared for school with renewed energy. The facade I needed to maintain had a definite endpoint now. 8 p.m. tonight. At breakfast, my parents continued their performance of normalcy. Dad mentioned a college fair happening at Connecticut State next weekend, suggesting we attend together. I agreed with what I hoped was convincing enthusiasm. all while knowing I would likely be having a very different conversation about my future by evening. School passed in a blur. During lunch, I updated Derek on the latest developments, including my grandparents' early return. "Want me to drive you to the hotel tonight?" he offered. "Could be awkward if your parents see you leaving." "That would be great," I accepted. "I'll say we're studying for the calc final at your place." In calculus class, my phone vibrated with an email notification. Stanford had approved my deferment request. I had a guaranteed spot in next year's freshman class, provided I could figure out the finances. One small victory. By the time the final bell rang, I'd crafted a careful plan for the evening. I told my parents I'd be at Derek's house studying, packed my evidence folder in my backpack, and waited for Derek to pick me up. "Are you ready for this?" Derek asked as we drove toward the Riverside Hotel. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, reviewing my notes one last time. My grandparents have always been straight shooters. If anyone can get to the bottom of this, it's them. "What do you think the deal is with your uncle?" "Why would your parents give him your money if his business is doing well?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But I heard them talking last night. Dad said something about Uncle Robert losing everything if they didn't help. It doesn't make sense with what we know about his business." The Riverside Hotel came into view, its elegant facade glowing in the early evening light. My grandparents had texted that they'd checked into room 412. "Want me to wait?" Derek asked as he pulled up to the entrance. I shook my head. "This might take a while. I'll text you when I'm done." "Good luck," he said. "And Tyler? Whatever happens, we'll figure out Stanford, even if I have to sell a kidney." That pulled a genuine laugh from me. Let's save that for Plan Z. I entered the hotel, rode the elevator to the 4th floor, and knocked on room 412. The door opened immediately, revealing my grandmother's familiar face, creased with concern and jet lag. "Tyler," she said, pulling me into a tight hug. "Come in, sweetheart." My grandfather rose from his seat by the window, looking more serious than I'd ever seen him. "Tyler, good to see you, son." "Thanks for coming back early," I said, hugging. "Em as well?" "Of course we came back," Grandma said firmly. "Now, tell us everything, from the beginning." For the next hour, I walked them through what had happened, showing them the photographs I'd taken of the trust documents, explaining the contradictions in my parents' story about Uncle Robert's finances, and sharing what I'd overheard the night before. My grandparents listened intently, occasionally exchanging glances that communicated decades of shared understanding. "This is outrageous," Grandpa said when I finished. "That money was explicitly for your education. We established the trust when you were born, with the clear understanding that it would be used for your college expenses. The legal issue," Grandma added, "is that we did make your parents the trustees, with discretionary control over disbursements. We never imagined they would interpret that to mean they could redirect the entire fund to someone else." "So there's nothing we can do legally?" I asked, disappointment creeping in. "I didn't say that," Grandpa replied, a determined glint in his eye. "There are always options. But first, I want to understand what's really going on with Robert. Something doesn't add up." "That's what I thought," I agreed. "His company just landed a major city contract, he's buying a new boat, and Melissa's walking around with a brand new top-of-the-line laptop. Doesn't sound like someone in financial distress." Grandma pulled out her phone. "I'm calling Edward." "Who's Edward?" I asked. "My brother," Grandpa explained. "Your great-uncle. He's on the city zoning board and knows everyone in local business. If something's happening with Robert's company, he'll have heard about it." As Grandma stepped into the bathroom to make the call, Grandpa turned to me with a serious expression. "Whatever's going on, Tyler, we're going to make this right. You've worked too hard for Stanford to have it taken away from you." "I've been approved for deferment," I told him. "So I have a year to figure out the finances." You won't need a year, he said confidently. We'll resolve this much sooner. Grandma returned from the bathroom, her expression troubled. Edward had some interesting information. It seems Robert's big city contract has a problem. The environmental impact study came back with major concerns. The contract is on hold pending further review. So his business might be in trouble after all? I asked. Potentially, Grandma acknowledged. But that doesn't explain why your parents would give away your college fund without discussing it with us or you. There's more to this story. Tomorrow, Grandpa said decisively, we're going to have a family meeting. All of us, your parents. Robert, everyone, it's time to get the truth out in the open. I nodded, feeling a mix of anticipation and dread. After days of maintaining a careful facade, pretending I had accepted my parents' decision, tomorrow would bring everything into the open. What should I do tonight? I asked. Act normal when I get home? Yes, Grandma advised. Don't let on that we're back or that we've spoken. Tomorrow morning we'll come to the house. Better to have this conversation on our territory than theirs. I checked the time, nearly 10 p.m. I needed to get home before my parents became suspicious. Should go, I said, gathering my notes. Derek's waiting to drive me home. We'll see you tomorrow then, Grandpa said, giving me another hug. Around 9 a.m. Your father should be home since it's Tuesday. He doesn't go into the office until afternoon on Tuesdays, right? I nodded, impressed by his recall of my father's schedule. Tyler, Grandma said as I reached the door, I'm proud of how you've handled this. You've been methodical and mature. Exactly the qualities Stanford saw in you. Her words warmed me as I texted Derek to come pick me up. After days of pretending, of maintaining a facade while gathering evidence, tomorrow would bring the confrontation I'd been preparing for. My parents thought they'd made their decision final, that I had accepted their betrayal and moved on. They had no idea what was coming. The next morning dawned bright and clear, a perfect spring day that belied the storm about to break in our household. I'd barely slept, rehearsing what I might say during the upcoming confrontation, imagining my parents' explanations and excuses. My alarm went off at 6:30 a.m., though I'd been staring at the ceiling for hours already. I dressed for school as usual, packed my backpack and headed downstairs, where Mom was making coffee in the kitchen. Morning, sweetie, she said with forced cheer. Breakfast? Just toast, thanks, I replied, careful to maintain my facade for a few hours longer. I need to get to school early for a study group. Dad entered the kitchen, already dressed for the office in his usual Tuesday business casual, navy slacks and a light blue button-down. Morning, son. Sleep well? Fine, I lied, accepting the toast Mom handed me. Are you heading to work early today? No, working from home this morning, Dad replied, pouring himself coffee. Got some reports to review before my afternoon meetings. Perfect. Just as Grandpa had anticipated, everyone would be here when my grandparents arrived at 9 a.m. Cool, I said casually. I might come home for lunch then, if you'll be around. That would be nice, Mom said, her smile a little too eager. They were still working so hard to normalize everything. I finished my toast quickly, glancing at the clock. 7:15 a.m. I needed to leave for school to maintain appearances, then circle back once my grandparents arrived. Gotta run, I said, grabbing my backpack. See you guys later. As I walked to the bus stop, I texted Derek. Operation Confrontation set for 9 a.m. I'll keep you posted. His response came immediately. Good luck. Man, text if you need backup. I boarded the school bus as usual, rode it 3 stops past my usual destination, then got off and called an Uber to take me to a coffee shop near my neighborhood. There, I ordered a large coffee and settled in to wait. At 8:45, I'd walk back. Home, timing my arrival to coincide with my grandparents. The waiting was excruciating. I tried to review my calculus notes, but the equations blurred before my eyes. Instead, I found myself rehearsing what I would say, how I would respond to various scenarios. Would my parents deny everything? Try to justify their actions again? Would Uncle Robert admit to whatever financial trouble he was actually in? At 8:40, I packed up and began the short walk back to my neighborhood. As I turned onto my street, I spotted my grandparents' silver Lincoln pulling up in front of our house. Perfect timing. Grandpa saw me approaching and gave a small nod. And Grandma waited for me to reach them before walking to the front door together. "Ready?" Grandma asked quietly. I took a deep breath and nodded. "Ready." Grandpa rang the doorbell. Moments later, Mom opened the door, her expression shifting from casual welcome to shock as she registered who was standing on her porch. "William? Eleanor? I thought you were on your cruise." "We came back early," Grandpa said, his tone even but firm. "We need to talk, Susan." Mom's eyes darted to me, understanding and alarm dawning simultaneously. "Tyler, you're supposed to be at school." "This is more important," I replied simply. "Who is it, honey?" Dad's voice called from inside the house. "It's your parents," Mom replied, her voice strained. "And Tyler." Dad appeared in the doorway, his face paling slightly. "Mom, Dad, what are you doing here? Your cruise?" "May we come in, Mark?" Grandma asked, though it wasn't really a question. Dad stepped aside wordlessly, allowing us to enter. We moved to the living room, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. "What's going on?" Dad asked, trying to regain his composure. "Is everything all right?" "No, everything is not all right," Grandpa stated, sitting on the sofa and gesturing for Grandma and me to join him. "We've heard a very disturbing story from Tyler about his college fund." Mom and Dad exchanged a glance that confirmed everything. They knew exactly why their parents had returned early, why I was home from school, why we were all sitting in the living room on a Tuesday morning. "It's complicated," Dad began. "Then uncomplicate it for us," Grandma said sharply. "Explain why." "You gave Tyler's college fund, money we specifically set aside for his education, to Melissa without consulting us or him." Dad straightened his shoulders, shifting into what I recognized as his business negotiation posture. "As trustees of the fund, we have discretionary control over how the money is used for educational purposes." "Don't lawyer us, Mark," Grandpa cut in. "We're not disputing the legal technicality. We're asking why you would make such a decision without discussing it with anyone." "We did what we thought was best for the family," Mom interjected, her voice trembling slightly. "Robert needed help with Melissa's tuition, and Tyler has other options." "What other options?" I finally spoke up. "Stanford was my dream school. You knew that. I worked for years to get in." "Connecticut State has a perfectly good computer science program," Dad replied, repeating his familiar refrain. "This isn't about Connecticut State versus Stanford," Grandma said. "It's about why you believed you had the right to redirect funds. We set up for Tyler without even having a conversation about it." A tense silence fell over the room. Dad glanced at his watch, perhaps hoping this confrontation would end before he needed to leave for his afternoon meetings. "We should call Robert," he said finally. "If we're going to discuss this, he should be part of the conversation." "An excellent idea," Grandpa agreed, his tone suggesting he'd been hoping for exactly this. "Call him now." Dad hesitated, then pulled out his phone and dialed. After a brief exchange, he hung up. "He'll be here in 20 minutes. While we waited, the living room remained thick with uncomfortable silence. Mom kept smoothing her pants nervously. Dad checked his email on his phone, and my grandparents sat perfectly still, their expressions giving away nothing. I observed it all, mentally preparing for whatever would come next. Uncle Robert arrived exactly 20 minutes later, looking confused and concerned. "Mark, Susan, what's going on?" Then he noticed my grandparents. "William, Eleanor, I thought you were on your Mediterranean cruise." "We returned early," Grandpa said, standing to greet his younger son. "We need to discuss Tyler's college fund and why it was redirected to Melissa." Uncle Robert's expression fell. He glanced at my father, then back to my grandparents. I see. Do you? Grandma asked pointedly. Because we don't. We don't understand why money we set aside for Tyler's education was given to Melissa without anyone consulting us or Tyler. It's complicated. Uncle Robert echoed my father's earlier words. That seems to be the refrain today, Grandpa noted, dryly. I'm finding that word complicated is often a substitute for, we did something wrong and don't want to explain it. The tension in the room ratcheted up another notch. Dad and Uncle Robert exchanged a look I couldn't quite interpret. Is Melissa aware of where her tuition money came from? Grandma asked, turning to Uncle Robert. He shifted uncomfortably. No, at least not from me. Mark and Susan simply offered to help with her education. She knows now, I said, drawing everyone's attention. I told her. You what? Dad looked genuinely shocked. Tyler, that wasn't your place to— Wasn't my place, I interrupted, anger finally breaking through my calm facade. It was my college fund, money that was meant for my education. How is it not my place to tell Melissa where it came from? How did she react? Uncle Robert asked quietly. She offered to decline Johns Hopkins, I replied. She was horrified when she found out the money was taken from my college fund. Uncle Robert closed his eyes briefly, looking pained. She shouldn't have to make that choice. Neither should Tyler, Grandpa pointed out. Yet here we are. We need to know what's really going on, Grandma said firmly. Not the story about Robert needing financial help. We know his business just landed a major city contract. She fixed her gaze on my father. The truth, Mark. Now. Dad sighed deeply, exchanging another look with Uncle Robert before finally speaking. The contract is in jeopardy. The environmental review found serious problems with the proposed development site. If the contract falls through, Mitchell Construction could go bankrupt. And this relates to Tyler's college fund. How, exactly? Grandpa pressed. Uncle Robert spoke up. The environmental issues were not unexpected. Meaning? Grandma's voice had a dangerous edge. Meaning we had reason to believe there might be contamination issues at the site, Uncle Robert admitted. The preliminary testing showed some concerning results. But you bid on the contract anyway? I asked, pieces starting to click into place. Knowing there were environmental problems? We disclosed everything we were legally required to disclose, Uncle Robert replied carefully. Grandpa's expression hardened. In other words, you withheld information that might have cost you the contract. It was a calculated risk, Dad interjected. The full environmental assessment wasn't due until after the initial contract was awarded. And now that assessment has come back with major concerns, I said, recalling Grandma's conversation with Great-Uncle Edward. So the contract is on hold. Yes, Uncle Robert confirmed. And if it's canceled entirely, we'll lose the performance bond we put up. It would bankrupt the company. The performance bond, Grandpa repeated. How much are we talking about? Uncle Robert and Dad exchanged another glance. $2 million, Dad finally answered. The room fell silent as the magnitude of that number sank in. And my college fund? I asked, though I was beginning to see where this was heading. What does that have to do with the performance bond? Dad cleared his throat. The company's financials are stretched thin right now. We had to put up the bond with personal funds. Your personal funds? Grandma clarified. Or Tyler's college fund? Both, Dad admitted. We used most of our savings, but it wasn't enough. We needed more liquid assets quickly. The pieces finally clicked into place. You're using Melissa's tuition as a cover story, I said, the realization washing over me. You didn't give her my college fund because you thought medicine was more worthwhile than computer science. You took my money to help Uncle Robert cover up potential environmental violations, and you used Melissa's education as a convenient excuse. The guilty expressions on my father's and uncle's faces confirmed my theory. "Is this true?" Grandpa demanded. After a long moment, Dad nodded. The money wasn't directly used for the bond, but we needed to free up our personal funds to contribute to the bond, which meant we couldn't help Robert with Melissa's tuition as we'd promised. "So you used Tyler's money instead," Grandma said flatly. "We didn't have a choice," Uncle Robert insisted. "If the company goes under, 28 people lose their jobs. Families that depend on us." "There's always a choice," Grandpa replied, his voice steely. "You chose to bid on a contract knowing there were environmental concerns. You chose to risk the company. You chose to take money intended for Tyler's education rather than face the consequences of your decisions. What happens if the contract is officially canceled?" I asked. "Will you lose the performance bond regardless of what happens with my college fund?" Dad nodded grimly. "Most likely. The environmental issues are significant. So my Stanford education was sacrificed for nothing," I said, the bitterness rising in my throat. "Even if the company goes bankrupt, that money is gone either way." "We were hoping," Uncle Robert began, then faltered. "Hoping what?" Grandma pressed. "Hoping we could find a way to remediate the environmental issues before the final assessment," Dad finished. "We've been working with consultants, trying to find a solution that would allow the project to proceed." "At what cost?" Grandpa asked. "More money? More corners cut? More ethical lines crossed?" The harsh question hung in the air unanswered. I stood up, needing to move, to process what I'd just learned. My college fund hadn't been redirected because my cousin's education was valued more highly than mine. It had been sacrificed in a desperate attempt to save a company that was in trouble because its leaders had been willing to overlook environmental concerns for profit. "Does Melissa know about any of this?" I asked Uncle Robert. He shook his head. "No. She thinks Mark and Susan are simply being generous." "And the money is already in her tuition account at Johns Hopkins?" Grandma asked. Dad nodded. "The first year's tuition and housing, yes, paid in full." Grandpa stood up, his expression resolute. "This is unacceptable. All of it. You've betrayed Tyler's trust, you've betrayed our trust, and you've potentially violated environmental regulations in the process. We were trying to save the company," Uncle Robert insisted. "Protect our employees, our family legacy." "By sacrificing your nephew's future?" Grandma challenged. "By making decisions about money that wasn't yours to spend?" The doorbell rang, interrupting the tense exchange. Mom, looking relieved at the distraction, went to answer it. She returned moments later with Melissa in tow, looking anxious and out of place. "Melissa," Uncle Robert said, surprised. "Why aren't you at school?" "I couldn't focus," she replied, then noticed the full room. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize you were having a family meeting." "It's fine," I said, stepping forward. "We're discussing my college fund and why it was given to you." Melissa's face crumpled. "I told Dad last night that I can't accept the money. Not if it means you can't go to Stanford." Uncle Robert looked stricken. "Melissa, we've talked about this. Johns Hopkins is your dream school." "Not at Tyler's expense," she said firmly. "It's not right." "There's more to it than you know," Uncle Robert began. But Grandpa cut him off. "Melissa deserves the truth too," he said. "She's an adult making decisions about her education. She should know what's really going on." And so, piece by piece, the whole story came out. The company's financial troubles, the environmental issues with the contract, the performance bond, the decision to use my college fund to cover Melissa's tuition so that my parents could contribute to the bond. Melissa listened in growing horror. "So I'm just, what, a convenient excuse? A cover story for taking Tyler's money to save the company from its own bad decisions?" "It wasn't like that," Uncle Robert protested. "We were trying to protect everyone's future." "By destroying Tyler's," Melissa shot back. "I won't be part of this. I'm declining Johns Hopkins and asking them to refund the tuition. Tyler should get his money back." "It's not that simple," Dad said, looking increasingly desperate. The company needs that money. If the contract is canceled, then the company will face the consequences of its actions, Grandpa interrupted. As it should. As you should. The room fell silent again, each person absorbing the full implications of what had been revealed. Finally, Grandma spoke up. We need to make this right, starting with Tyler's education. How? Dad asked, sounding defeated. The money is gone, either to Melissa's tuition or to the company's bond. We can't just conjure up $120,000. Actually, Grandpa said, his voice taking on a determined edge, we can. Eleanor and I will cover Tyler's Stanford tuition. What? I gasped, not having expected this solution. William, are you sure? Mom asked, equally surprised. Absolutely, Grandpa affirmed. We set aside that money for Tyler's education once. We'll do it again. The difference is, this time we'll pay Stanford directly. No trustees, no intermediaries. We can't let you do that, Dad protested. That's your retirement money. You lost the right to have a say in how we spend our money when you misappropriated funds we designated for Tyler, Grandma said firmly. This is our decision. I felt a wave of emotion wash over me. Relief, gratitude, vindication. My grandparents had become my true allies in this battle, stepping up to ensure my future wasn't sacrificed for my father's and uncle's mistakes. Thank you, I said, my voice thick. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything, Grandpa replied. Just excel at Stanford like we know you will. Melissa stepped forward. I still want to return the tuition payment. It doesn't feel right keeping it. We'll figure out your education too, Melissa, Grandma assured her. This situation isn't your fault either. Uncle Robert looked torn between gratitude for his daughter and shame over the situation. We should go, he said finally. Melissa, and I need to talk. As they prepared to leave, Melissa pulled me aside. I'm so sorry about all of this, Tyler. I had no idea. I know, I assured her. We're good, and we'll both find our paths forward. After they left, my parents sat in stunned silence, the full weight of their exposed deception hanging heavy in the room. There will be consequences for this, Grandpa said, addressing my parents directly. Trust, once broken, is not easily rebuilt. What happens now? Dad asked quietly. Now, Grandma said, we make arrangements for Tyler's Stanford tuition, and you two need to decide how you're going to handle the company's ethical lapses, because if you don't address them voluntarily, we will. The threat hung in the air, clear and unmistakable. My grandparents weren't just concerned about my college fund anymore. They were taking a stand on the larger ethical issues at play. As the confrontation wound down, I realized something profound had changed. I had found allies who were willing to fight for me, to ensure my future wasn't sacrificed for others' mistakes. My grandparents had stepped up in a way I would never forget, and while my relationship with my parents lay in tatters, I now had a clear path forward. Stanford was back on the table. My future, momentarily derailed by betrayal, was mine again. But this was just the beginning. As I would soon discover, the repercussions of this family confrontation would echo for years to come, eventually leading me to an opportunity I could never have anticipated. The chance to own my parents' mortgage and deliver the final lesson about the true meaning of family obligation. The days following the confrontation passed in a strange limbo. My grandparents had rented a suite at the Riverside Hotel, rather than staying at our house as they usually would. I spent most of my time with them, returning home only to sleep and gather my belongings for school the next day. My parents moved, through the house like ghosts, speaking little and avoiding eye contact. On Thursday afternoon, I sat in my grandparents' hotel suite, watching Grandpa make calls to Stanford's financial aid office while Grandma reviewed documents spread across the desk. Yes, we'll be wiring the full first-year tuition payment next week, Grandpa said into the phone, and we'd like to set up a direct payment plan for the remaining years. Yes, I understand. Perfect. As he hung up, Grandma looked up from her papers. Tyler, these environmental reports about the development site. Have you reviewed them? I shook my head. I didn't even know they existed until the confrontation. She pushed several pages toward me. Take a look. Your great-uncle Edward provided these. I skimmed through the documents, my limited knowledge of environmental science making it difficult to grasp all the details. But certain phrases jumped out. Above acceptable levels of lead contamination. Evidence of industrial waste disposal. Potential groundwater contamination. This looks serious, I said, looking up at my grandparents. It is, Grandpa confirmed grimly, which makes your father's and uncle's decision to bid on this contract despite preliminary warnings all the more concerning. Could they face legal consequences? I asked, a new worry forming. Grandma sighed. It's possible. If they knowingly withheld information during the bidding process, that could constitute fraud. At minimum, they'll lose the performance bond and the company will take a significant financial hit. And at worst, criminal charges, Grandpa said bluntly, though it would depend on how much they knew and what specifically they concealed. The gravity of the situation sank in. My college fund was just the tip of the iceberg. My father and I. Uncle had potentially committed fraud, putting not only their company but their freedom at risk. My phone buzzed with a text from Melissa. Can we meet? Need to talk. I showed the message to my grandparents. I should probably talk to her, I said. She's caught in the middle of this too. Of course, Grandma agreed. Why don't you invite her here? We'd like to speak with her as well. An hour later, Melissa arrived at the hotel suite, looking tired but resolute. She hugged my grandparents, then me, before sitting on the edge of the couch. I met with the financial aid office at Johns Hopkins yesterday, she announced without preamble. I explained that I needed to return the tuition payment and asked about other financial aid options. What did they say? I asked. They were surprised, obviously. But they're allowing me to return the payment and have offered me a partial scholarship based on my academics. It won't cover everything, but with student loans, I can make it work. Melissa, Grandma began gently, we don't want you to sacrifice your education either. This situation isn't your fault. I know, Melissa replied. But I can't accept money that was meant for Tyler. It's not right. And now that I know where it really came from and why, I just can't. Have you spoken with your father about this? Grandpa asked. Melissa's expression hardened slightly. We've been having some difficult conversations. He finally admitted everything to me last night. About the environmental issues, about knowing there were problems before bidding on the contract. I'm processing. We understand, Grandma said sympathetically. It's a lot to take in. Did? You know, Melissa asked me, that your dad is a 40% owner in Mitchell Construction? I blinked in surprise. No, I had no idea. Neither did I until yesterday, she said. Apparently, he's been a silent partner for years. That's why he was willing to use your college fund to help save the company. He's not just helping his brother. He's protecting his own investment. This revelation hit me like a physical blow. My father wasn't just helping his brother out of family loyalty. He had a direct financial stake in the company's survival. He had sacrificed my education to protect his own business interests. That changes things, Grandpa said, his expression darkening. Mark presented this as helping Robert in a time of need, but he was really trying to save himself as much as his brother. There's more, Melissa continued. The environmental issues, they're worse than they're admitting publicly. Dad showed me some of the internal reports last night. The site was previously used by a manufacturing company that improperly disposed of chemicals for decades. The cleanup would cost millions, maybe tens of millions. They knew this before bidding, but hoped they could find a cheaper remediation solution once they secured the contract. A gamble with potentially toxic land, Grandma said, shaking her head in disbelief. What were they thinking? They were thinking about profit margins, I said bitterly. And now they're scrambling to cover up their mistakes with my college fund. The money from your fund isn't going to make a difference in the grand scheme, Melissa pointed out. Not with the scale of the environmental issues they're facing, which makes it even more reprehensible that they took it, Grandpa said firmly. My phone buzzed again. A text from Derek. Dude, you need to see this. Attached was a link to a local news website. I clicked it open to find a headline that made my stomach drop. Mitchell Construction under investigation for environmental fraud in city development project. Oh no, I murmured, showing the others. It's going public. We all read the article in stunned silence. According to the report, a whistleblower within Mitchell Construction had provided documents to regulators showing the company had withheld crucial information about environmental contamination during the bidding process. The city had suspended the contract pending investigation, and both criminal and civil charges were being considered. This is a disaster, Melissa whispered, her face pale. Dad could go to jail. So could my father, I pointed out, the realization hitting me anew. We need more information, Grandpa decided, picking up his phone. Let me call Edward again. He'll know what's happening at the regulatory level. While Grandpa made his call, I texted Derek back. Just saw. Any idea who the whistleblower is? Derek's response came quickly. Rumor says it's someone high up in the company, maybe even someone in accounting who had access to the environmental reports. A thought struck. Yeah, the CFO? I said aloud. It must be Lawrence Dixon. Who? Melissa asked. Lawrence Dixon, Mitchell Construction's CFO, I explained. I met him a few times at company events. He always seemed uncomfortable around my dad and your dad. I remember him arguing with them at last year's Christmas party. Why would he blow the whistle now? Grandma wondered. Maybe he realized how far they were willing to go to cover this up, I suggested. Taking my college fund might have been the last straw, showing a pattern of financial dishonesty that extended beyond the company. Grandpa returned from his call, his expression grave. Edward says it's bad. The environmental violations are significant, and there's clear evidence they knew about them before submitting their bid. The performance bond is definitely forfeit, but that's likely just the beginning. What about criminal charges? I asked, dreading the answer. Possible, Grandpa confirmed. The city prosecutor is reviewing the evidence. At minimum, they'll face civil penalties and potentially be barred from city contracts for years. Mitchell Construction will be finished, Melissa said quietly. Everything Dad and Uncle Mark built. They did this to themselves, Grandma reminded her gently, by choosing to cut corners and hide information. I leaned back, trying to process everything. My college fund drama had unexpectedly pulled back the curtain on a much larger, more serious situation. What had started as a personal betrayal was now evolving into potential criminal charges that could destroy my family's reputation and livelihood. What do we do now? I asked, looking to my grandparents for guidance. We proceed with getting you settled at Stanford, Grandpa said firmly. Your future shouldn't be held hostage to their mistakes. Beyond that, we wait and see what happens. With the investigation, my phone rang, Dad's number flashing on the screen. I hesitated, then answered, putting it on speakerphone. Tyler, where are you? Dad's voice was tense, urgent. I'm with Grandma and Grandpa, I replied, and Melissa. A pause. Have you seen the news? Yes. I need you to come home, now. We need to talk as a family. I looked at my grandparents, who both nodded. We'll all come, I told him. We'll be there in 30 minutes. After hanging up, Melissa stood. I should call my dad too, see if he wants me to come home. She stepped into the hallway to make her call, returning moments later. He's already at your house with Uncle Mark. They want me to come over too. This is turning into quite the family summit, Grandma observed dryly. We drove to my house in a tense silence, each lost in our own thoughts. When we arrived, we found both my father's Mercedes and Uncle Robert's Range Rover in the driveway. The gravity of the situation was evident in the fact that they had called this emergency family meeting in the middle of a workday. Inside, the atmosphere was oppressive. Dad and Uncle Robert sat at the dining room table, papers spread before them, both looking like they hadn't slept. Mom was pacing in the kitchen, phone to her ear, her voice low and urgent. "You're here," Dad said, looking up as we entered. His eyes were bloodshot, his normally impeccable appearance disheveled. "We need to talk about what's happening." "We've seen the news," Grandpa said, taking a seat across from his sons. "And we've spoken to Edward. The situation looks serious." "Uncle," Robert ran a hand through his hair. "It's a nightmare. Someone inside the company leaked internal reports to the city. We're trying to get ahead of it, but the damage is already done." "The damage was done when you bid on a contract knowing there were serious environmental concerns," Grandma pointed out, her tone unyielding. "We didn't know how serious they were," Dad insisted. "The preliminary tests showed some issues, yes, but nothing that indicated the level of contamination that's been found." "Don't lie to us, Mark," Grandpa said sharply. "Not again. Melissa has told us about the internal reports. You knew exactly what you were dealing with." Dad shot an angry glance at Melissa, who straightened her spine and met his gaze unflinchingly. "We thought we could manage it," Uncle Robert admitted after a moment. "Find a cost-effective remediation approach once we secure the contract." "And when you couldn't?" I asked. "What then?" Neither of them answered, which was answer enough. Mom joined us, having finished her call. "The lawyer says we need to cooperate fully with the investigation. Trying to obstruct or cover up at this point will only make things worse." "Smart advice," Grandpa agreed. "Though a bit late in coming." "What about the company?" Melissa asked her father. "What happens to Mitchell Construction?" Uncle Robert's expression was bleak. "Best case? We lose the city contract, forfeit the bond, pay substantial fines, and try to rebuild our reputation over time. Worst case? The company goes bankrupt, and your uncle and I face criminal charges for fraud." "And all the employees?" I pressed. "The ones you were supposedly trying to protect by taking my college fund? They'll likely lose their jobs either way," Dad admitted, unable to meet my eyes. "The company can't survive this kind of scandal intact." "So my college fund was sacrificed for nothing," I said, the final confirmation of what I'd already suspected. We're trying to save something that was already beyond saving," Uncle Robert said quietly. "We just couldn't admit it to ourselves. Or to anyone else," Grandma added pointedly. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. "There's something else you all should know," Dad said finally. "Something that hasn't hit the news yet, but probably will soon." We all looked at him expectantly. "The environmental contamination? It's not just an issue for the development project. The tests indicate that the groundwater contamination may have spread to neighboring properties, including residential areas," Grandma gasped. "Are you saying people's homes might be affected?" Dad nodded grimly. "The city is already planning to test residential wells in the area. If they find contamination, it becomes a public health crisis, not just a contractual violation." "My God," Grandpa whispered. "This is far worse than we imagined." "That's why we're meeting with the city tomorrow," Uncle Robert explained. "To get ahead of this, to show we're cooperating fully, to try to mitigate the damage." "And you think that will be enough?" I asked incredulously. "After you bid on a project knowing it might be contaminating people's drinking water?" "We didn't know it had spread to residential areas," Dad insisted. "That's only come to light in the most recent testing." "But you knew it was a possibility," Melissa challenged. "The internal reports mentioned groundwater migration risks. I saw them myself." Again, neither my father nor uncle could meet our eyes. "I need to ask," Grandma said after a moment, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Was Tyler's college fund the only money you've misappropriated to deal with this situation?" Dad and Uncle. Robert exchanged a glance that sent a chill down my spine. No, Dad admitted finally. We've been moving money around for months, trying to shore up the company's finances in anticipation of potential legal costs. What money? Grandpa demanded. What else have you taken? We borrowed against our home equity, Mom interjected. Maxed out credit lines. Used some of the money from your trust fund, Mark. My trust fund? Grandpa looked stunned. The one we set up for your retirement? Dad nodded, looking miserable. We were desperate. The more we learned about the contamination, the more we realized how bad this could get. We needed resources to fight it. Or to run from it, I suggested, a new thought occurring to me. Were you planning to flee if things got bad enough? Is that why you've been liquidating assets? The guilty looks that passed between my parents confirmed my suspicion. You were, I realized aloud. You were preparing to cut and run if the scandal broke. It wasn't like that, Mom protested weakly. We were just trying to protect what we could, at everyone else's expense, Grandma said, her voice cold with disappointment. Including your own son. Uncle Robert looked at Melissa, his expression pained. I was trying to ensure you could still go to Johns Hopkins no matter what happened with the company. That's why I accepted Mark and Susan's offer to pay your tuition. With Tyler's money, Melissa reminded him, which I've already arranged to return. You what? Uncle Robert looked shocked. Melissa, that money is your future. No, it's Tyler's future that you stole, she shot back, and I won't be part of it. None of this solves the immediate crisis, Grandpa interrupted, bringing us back to the central issue. The company is under investigation. There may be public health implications, and you've both jeopardized not just your professional reputations, but potentially your freedom. We know, Dad said quietly. That's why we called you all here. We need to present a united family front as we navigate this. A united front? I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. After you betrayed everyone in this room? After you lied repeatedly, stole my college fund, risked public health, and were preparing to flee if things went south? Tyler, Mom began, her tone pleading. No, I cut her off. Don't try to minimize this. Don't try to make it seem like we should all just forget what you've done and rally around you now that you've been caught. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. The boy's right, Grandpa said finally. You don't get to demand family loyalty after showing none of yourselves. What happens to my college fund now? I asked, changing the subject. Melissa said she's returning the tuition payment. Does that money come back to me? Dad and Uncle E. Robert exchanged another one of those looks that I was beginning to detest. It's complicated, Dad hedged. Uncomplicate it, I demanded, echoing Grandma's words from our previous confrontation. The money was used as collateral for a business loan, Uncle Robert admitted. When Melissa returns it, it goes to the bank, not back to you. I stared at them in disbelief. So you weren't even honest about that? It didn't go to Melissa's tuition at all? Some of it did, Dad clarified. About a third. The rest was collateral for a loan we needed to cover legal fees and consultants trying to find a cheaper remediation solution. Each new revelation felt like another betrayal. They hadn't just stolen my college fund. They'd lied about where it was going, used it to try to cover up their mistakes, and now it was effectively gone, siphoned away into a failing business and mounting legal fees. I think we've heard enough, Grandpa said, standing abruptly. Tyler will be attending Stanford as planned, with Eleanor and me covering his tuition directly. What happens to Mitchell Construction and to both of you is no longer our concern. Dad? Please, my father began, but Grandpa cut him off with a raised hand. No, Mark. You've broken faith with everyone in this family. There are consequences for that. You and Robert will face this situation on your own, as you should have from the beginning, instead of dragging innocent people into your mess. As my grandparents prepared to leave, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The full extent of the deception had finally been exposed. Not just the theft of my college fund, but the web of lies surrounding it, the environmental fraud, the misappropriation of other family funds, and the preparations to flee if necessary. My parents weren't just guilty of prioritizing my cousin's education over mine. They were guilty of something far more serious: sacrificing integrity, family trust, and potentially public health for financial gain. As I gathered my things to leave with my grandparents, I paused in the doorway, looking back at the people I'd trusted my entire life. "I'll be staying with Grandma and Grandpa until graduation," I informed them. "After that, I'll be heading to Stanford as planned. What happens with your legal problems and the company is your concern, not mine." "Tyler? Please," Mom called after me, her voice breaking. "We're still your parents. We still love you." I turned back one last time. Love doesn't take someone's future to save your own mistakes. Love doesn't lie repeatedly when caught. What you did wasn't love. It was self-preservation at my expense. As I walked out with my grandparents and Melissa, I felt a chapter of my life closing. But I also felt a new resolve forming. Someday, somehow, I would find a way to ensure that my parents fully understood the consequences of their choices. Not out of vengeance, but out of a deep-seated belief that accountability was necessary for growth. Little did I know then that opportunity would come in the form of their mortgage, and sooner than any of us could have imagined. 5 years after. The college fund drama that had torn our family apart, I stood outside my childhood home on Maple Avenue, the late autumn breeze stirring fallen leaves across the immaculately maintained lawn. The house looked smaller somehow, less imposing than I remembered. The white colonial with black shutters that had once represented security and family now stood as a monument to betrayal and consequences. I checked my watch, 2:45 p.m. My parents would be expecting me at 3. I had intentionally arrived early, wanting a moment to compose myself before this meeting. In my briefcase was a document that represented the culmination of 5 years of strategic planning, education, and patience. Today wasn't about revenge, it was about closure. A silver Mercedes pulled into the driveway, my father, home early, from work. Some things hadn't changed, like his preference for luxury cars, even as everything else in his life had transformed dramatically. I watched from my parked Tesla as he exited his vehicle, noticing the new streaks of gray in his hair, the slight stoop to his shoulders that hadn't been there 5 years ago. He spotted me and paused, a complex mixture of emotions crossing his face before he raised a hand in awkward greeting. I nodded in acknowledgement and stepped out of my car. "Tyler," he said as I approached. "You're early." "Thought I'd beat the traffic," I replied neutrally. "How are you, Dad?" He seemed momentarily thrown by the casual question. Our interactions over the past 5 years had been minimal and strictly practical when they occurred at all. "I'm managing. Your mother will be happy to see you." I doubted that. Happy wasn't the right word for how anyone would feel about today's meeting. We entered the house together, the familiar smell of Mom's cinnamon candles washing over me. The interior had changed. Furniture rearranged, new paint colors, fewer family photographs on the walls. The physical manifestations of a family fractured. "Susan," Dad called out. "Tyler's here." Mom emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands, on a dish towel. Like Dad, she had aged visibly in 5 years. More lines around her eyes, her blonde hair now highlighted to mask the gray. "Tyler," she said, her smile tight with anxiety. "Can I get you something to drink? Coffee? Water?" "Water would be great," I replied, following them into the living room. As Mom disappeared into the kitchen, Dad gestured toward the sofa. "Please sit. Your mother insisted on baking this morning. Apparently, we're pretending this is a normal family visit." The bitter edge to his voice spoke volumes about where our relationship stood. I took a seat in an armchair rather than on the sofa, maintaining both physical and emotional distance. "How's Stanford?" Dad asked, attempting small talk. "You're graduating this year, right?" "I graduated last year," I corrected him. "Finished. The 5-year program in 4. I've been working at Vertex Technologies in their financial division for the past 9 months." "Right," he nodded, looking slightly embarrassed at not knowing this basic information about my life. "Your grandparents mentioned you were doing well." Of course they did. My grandparents had become the bridge between us, the only remaining connection to my parents that I hadn't completely severed. Mom returned with water and a plate of chocolate chip cookies, my childhood favorite. A transparent attempt at nostalgia that fell flat against the reality of why I was here. "So," Dad said after an uncomfortable silence had stretched between us, "your email said you wanted to discuss something important. Something about the house?" I placed my briefcase on the coffee table and withdrew a folder containing several documents. "Yes. As you know, First National Bank has held your mortgage for the past 15 years. What you may not know is that they've been bundling and selling mortgage-backed securities to investors." Dad's brow furrowed. "I don't see how that concerns us. Our mortgage terms remain the same regardless of who holds the paper." "Ordinarily, yes," I agreed, opening the folder. "But 3 months ago, Vertex Technologies' investment division acquired a portfolio of loans from First National, including the mortgage on this property." Mom's hand froze midway to her mouth. Cookie forgotten. "What are you saying, Tyler?" "I'm saying that Vertex Technologies now holds your mortgage," I explained calmly. "And as of last week, I personally acquired it from them." The stunned silence that followed was exactly what I had anticipated. Dad's expression shifted from confusion to dawning comprehension to something approaching fear. "You own our mortgage?" he finally managed. "Yes," I confirmed, sliding the documentation across the table. "All legal, all above board. I used my signing bonus and some of my savings to purchase it when I learned it was in the portfolio my company had acquired." "Why?" Mom whispered, the single word laden with apprehension. I leaned back in my chair, considering how to articulate the complex mixture of motivations that had led me to this moment. "Do you remember the day I discovered you'd given away my college fund?" I asked. "You told me Melissa deserved it more, that her education was more worthwhile than mine." They both had the grace to look ashamed. "Later, we learned the truth, that you'd used my future to try to cover up environmental fraud and save a failing company. That you'd lied not just to me, but to everyone, including Melissa." "Tyler, that was 5 years ago," Dad interjected, a defensive edge to his voice. "We've paid for those mistakes. The company went bankrupt. We faced legal consequences. Your uncle spent 18 months in prison. And you avoided jail time only because you cooperated with prosecutors," I reminded him. "But that's not why I'm here. I'm not looking to punish you further for past mistakes." "Then why buy our mortgage?" Mom asked, genuine confusion in her voice. I pulled out another document from my folder. "Because of this." They leaned forward to look at what I was showing them. A financial statement from Mitchell Properties, the small real estate management company my father had started after Mitchell Construction's collapse. "Where did you get that?" Dad demanded. "Financial databases are quite comprehensive these days," I replied. "Especially when you know where to look. Mitchell Properties is doing well. Surprisingly well for a company started by someone with a fraud conviction on his record. Your projects in the Old Mill District are particularly profitable." Dad shifted uncomfortably. "We've worked hard to rebuild." "What's your point?" "My point is that you've recovered financially. You're not wealthy like before, but you're comfortable. Yet you've never once approached me about the college fund you took. Not to apologize meaningfully, not to make amends, not to offer repayment." "We couldn't afford," Mom began. 3 years ago? No, I cut her off. But for the past year and a half? According to these financials, you could have started to make it right. You chose not to. The silence that followed confirmed what I'd already known. They had moved on, rebuilding their lives without addressing the debt, financial and emotional, they owed me. So this is revenge, Dad concluded, his voice hardening. You've bought our mortgage to what? Threaten foreclosure? Force us to pay you back on your terms? I shook my head. No. This isn't about revenge. It's about accountability and choice. I pulled out the final document from my briefcase, a contract I had drafted with the help of my grandparents' attorney. This is a modification to your mortgage terms, I explained. It gives you 2 options. Option 1, continue with your current payment schedule to me instead of the bank, with a slight reduction in interest rate as a family courtesy. They looked at each other, clearly waiting for the catch. Option 2, I continued, is to acknowledge the debt you owe me, not just the $127,842.16 you took from my college fund, but also the growth it would have experienced over the past 5 years had it remained invested as my grandparents intended. That amount comes to approximately $175,000 with conservative investment returns. We don't have that kind of money on hand, Dad protested. I'm not asking for it as a lump sum, I clarified. Under option 2, you would sign a formal acknowledgement of the debt and agree to a repayment plan of $1,000 per month until it's paid off. In exchange, I would reduce your mortgage interest rate by 2 percentage points, saving you approximately $700 per month on your payment. Dad frowned, working through the numbers. So we'd be paying $300 more per month total, but directly addressing the college fund debt? Exactly, I confirmed. And each month, you'd be acknowledging what happened and taking responsibility for it, not just with words, but with actions. And if we choose option 1? Mom asked cautiously. Then nothing changes except who you make your check out to. I become your mortgage holder. You continue your payments as scheduled, and we maintain the status quo of our relationship, distant and purely transactional. Dad stood up abruptly, pacing the living room. This is extortion. No, I corrected him calmly. Extortion would be threatening to change your loan terms unfavorably, or force foreclosure if you didn't comply. I'm offering you better terms either way. I'm simply giving you the choice of how you want to proceed, with or without accountability for what you did. We've apologized, Tyler, Mom said, tears forming in her eyes. Many times. Words, I replied, not unkindly. But as you taught me through your actions, words without corresponding behavior are meaningless. Dad stopped pacing, studying me with a new expression, something between resentment and respect. You learned well, it seems. I had good teachers, I acknowledged, just not in the ways you intended. I stood, gathering the documents except for the contract, which I left on the table. Take some time to think about it. Talk it over. I don't need your answer today? How long do we have to decide? Dad asked. Your next mortgage payment is due in 2 weeks. I'll need your decision by then. Mom wiped her eyes. And if we choose option 2, the repayment plan, what does that mean for our relationship? Is this how it will always be between us? Business, transactions, and legal contracts? The question caught me off guard. In all my planning, I had focused on the financial and accountability aspects, not on what might come after. I don't know, I admitted. I'm not offering reconciliation as part of this deal. That would be its own process, with its own requirements. Like, what? She pressed. I considered the question seriously. Like complete honesty. Like respecting my choices and my path, like treating me as an equal, not as a child whose future you can dictate according to your needs. Dad returned to his seat, suddenly looking very tired. We've lost you, haven't we? Really lost you. You lost me the day you decided my education, My future was less important than covering up your mistakes, I replied. This isn't about getting me back. This is about acknowledging what happened and taking responsibility for it in a tangible way. I moved toward the door, pausing with my hand on the knob. I'll expect your decision in 2 weeks. My contact information is in the folder. Tyler, Mom called after me, her voice breaking slightly. Do you think you could ever forgive us? Ever really move past this? I turned back, seeing the genuine pain in her eyes. For a brief moment, I remembered the mother who had baked cookies when I was sick, who had cheered at my robotics competitions, who had helped me with science fair projects late into the night. I don't know, I answered honestly. But choosing option 2 would be a start, not because of the money, but because it would show that you finally understand what you took from me wasn't just funds, it was trust. Outside in the crisp autumn air, I took a deep breath, feeling a weight lift that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. 5 years ago, I had stood in this same driveway, a betrayed teenager with shattered trust and a derailed future. Today, I stood as a Stanford graduate with a promising career, financial independence, and something I had thought lost forever, power in my relationship with my parents. My phone buzzed with a text from Melissa. Did you do it? How did it go? Melissa and I had become close in the aftermath of the college fund disaster. She had indeed attended Johns Hopkins, financing her education through scholarships and loans, rather than accepting the tainted money from my parents. She was now in her second year of medical school at UCLA, excelling despite the financial challenges. Done, I texted back. Ball's in their court now. Her response came quickly. Dinner tonight to celebrate? My treat. I smiled, typing, absolutely. 7 p.m. at Lorenzo's? Perfect, she confirmed. As I drove away from my childhood home, I realized that while my parents had taken my college fund, they had inadvertently given me something else: resilience, determination, and a crash course in detecting dishonesty. These lessons had served me well at Stanford and in my budding finance career. 2 weeks later, I received a registered letter containing the signed contract, option 2. Along with it was a handwritten note from my mother. Tyler, we've chosen option 2, not because it's financially advantageous, but because you're right. We owe you this acknowledgement and this debt. What we took from you was wrong, regardless of our reasons or rationalizations. This is a first step toward taking responsibility for our actions. We don't expect forgiveness or reconciliation. Those must be earned over time, if they're possible, at all. But we want you to know that we are proud of the man you've become, even if we had little to do with shaping that man. Your strength, integrity, and clarity of purpose are admirable, even when directed at holding us accountable. Your mortgage holders, Mom and Dad. I folded the letter and placed it in my desk drawer. It wasn't an ending, not yet, but perhaps it was the beginning of a new chapter. One where the power dynamic had shifted, where accountability was possible, where trust might someday be rebuilt. My grandparents had taught me that family does right by family. My parents had failed that lesson spectacularly, but in forcing them to face the consequences of their actions, I had honored the principle in my own way. The first payment arrived exactly on schedule, with a memo line that simply read, College. Fund repayment 1175. A small acknowledgement, but a significant one. 174 more payments to go. 14.5 years of monthly reminders of the choices they had made and the accountability they had finally accepted. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's creating a situation where those who wronged you must face you and their own actions regularly with humility and acknowledgement. By owning their mortgage, I hadn't just acquired a financial asset. I had acquired something far more valuable, the power to ensure that the debt they owed me, financial and moral, would never again be forgotten or dismissed. And every month when their payment arrived, it served as a reminder to all of us. Family. Obligations work both ways, and some debts can't be avoided forever. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.